Hello everyone, welcome to today's Zero2Hero Hackathon workshop. And today our solution architect Victor will have a workshop and introducing building on Greenfield. So last time we already had a workshop on Greenfield, which gives a brief introduction of the whole ecosystem. And today Victor will give more hands-on tutorial experience, so how to build on the testnet, and we'll give you some more codings and where you can find all this GitHub tutorials. So Victor, maybe you can get started.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for coming and found time to listen to me, and naturally for the interest in the BNB chain and BNB Greenfield in particular. So today we are going to talk about BNB Greenfield. So a quick recap where it stands in terms of the ecosystem. So from the compute side, we have BNB Smart Chain and the rollups, whether it's ZK rollup or the optimistic rollup. But this is all compute. This is where you put your logic and smart contracts or interact with the API. And BNB Greenfield is envisioned to be the storage layer for the BNB chain initially, and later for the whole ecosystem of the blockchains through some kind of bridging. So as we previously described briefly, in order to operate on the Greenfield, you need BNB token. And from the operation perspective, how it's different is that you can delete files mainly from, and you can program the metadata of the files. One important aspect is data accessibility, is that you'll be, in order to program a Greenfield, you would need to connect both to the storage provider directly to get the data and to the Greenfield blockchain. So you have to have two connections for this. So this is just like to keep in mind. This is very different from any other blockchain where you would have only validators and that's it. Here it's a little bit more complex in terms of how many connections you would have to keep. So this is just to bear in mind. And on the fees, you're paying also for the storage and for the traffic. So when we're talking about how to communicate with Greenfield, so as you remember, there are different types of storage providers and the validators. So the validators are the ones who are actually building the blockchain, and the storage providers are the ones who are storing the data. So as I said before, in order to access the data to upload, you have to go to your storage provider. In order to change the metadata, you would have to go to the BSC through the layer, and this is where we'll show how to do it today, or to do directly through the to the Greenfield. We also show this today as well through the command line. A little bit about flow and how to build the application or how to build your business model. So the billing model essentially is built on top of flow-based billing, meaning that for each user in the system, there is an inflow, and that is the money or the tokens that they receive for some kind of operation, the royalties, if you will. And there is an outflow. This is the operational costs that are deducted from the user's account based on the usage and on the files stored on the system. So as any business, in a way, you have both the income and the outcome. And this is how you should think about your application, how you would either you always have this outflow because you have files stored and people are using them. So you need to make sure that your info outpasses your outflow, and then from the payment perspective and the cash flow, you'll be in the positive. There is also a transactional gas. So besides the fees that you pay for the actual storage, there is also gas for the transactions that you do with the blockchain. So this is similarly to any other blockchain and any other transactions. Reminder, everything is paid in BNB, while the storage and the traffic is measured in USD, but built in BNB. The transactions are both measured and built in BNB. And last aspect about the payment model is that you have two types of accounts. One is the stream account, and the other is a payment account. So the stream account is essentially just an account, is essentially the mirror of your BNB Smart Chain account. This is the same address using the same format building logic of the address. Naturally, it's not the same balance, so you have to deposit the money either directly or from a BNB Smart Chain. But the easy part that you don't actually need to create a new account, and this can be accessible with the same private key. And there are also payment accounts, and payment accounts are created so that you could separate or segregate the payment per different either operation, business units, or even like to create some kind of billing, like extended billing systems where you could put a payment account for each file or for each group or for each bucket. This is very similar to how traditional cloud billing works, and this was the aim essentially, so that it will be very easy for you to adapt your business model either from existing application or to think in these terms to building a new use case. And when we're talking about the files itself, this is so you'll be only talking about, unless you're extending the actual storage provider framework. From your perspective, this is sort of transparent. You don't really need to know where the file is stored. It doesn't matter as long as you have your primary storage provider. The framework itself makes sure that everything is replicated and stored on different secondary storage provider. So as if you're building the storage provider application or some kind of extension to this, or maybe some kind of infra or security extension, cryptography, then this is something that of more interesting about how the replication works using the erasure coding and how different segments are being split to objects and then put to different secondary storage providers. If you are building a client-facing application, something like I don't know, Spotify, Dropbox, or any other variations, then essentially it's irrelevant. You just upload the file, you pick. There is no vendor lock-in in that sense, so you can change the primary storage providers. I guess for the hackathon, it doesn't really matter. Just pick one, the first one that works for you and the fastest, and that's it. Later we'll look at what kind of storage providers exist in the testnet. So just check the pin and the best one for you, and that's it. And this is the one that you will be always communicating to. And the communication, again, similar to the traditional cloud providers. It's you have files that contain buckets, and you have users that are assigned to groups, and you can interchangeably assign permissions between those two groups. So, for instance, we will later look at the example where you would assign a file to a particular group to create access to this group, hence sort of like allowing your application to work. When we approach Greenfield development cycle, first of all, we need to understand how is it different from the traditional development. So if you talk about traditional development, broadly speaking, you have a front end, which is either deployed to some kind of a centralized platform, or maybe a centralized CDN, content delivery network. And the same with the assets, that is images, maybe some kind of scripts, JavaScripts, or styling CSSs. You have a backend, and this can be also in terms of lambdas, like serverless functions. This, from our perspective, doesn't matter. It's still it's still contained within the centralized platform. And you have the database. And again, doesn't matter if it is a big data, if it is a SQL or NoSQL. In the end, you have a database, whether it's a cluster or not, it still resides somewhere on the centralized platform. So currently, the Greenfield is at initial phase, V1. And this one is aims to put the front end and the file resources, essentially the left upper box, to the decentralized platform. Sorry. So you'll be able to both access the front end and the files in the decentralized way. The compute and the database will still be sort of like in the previous platforms. In the V2, that is the decentralized parallel processing in a way, that is called Greenfield executables. The aim is to move the lambdas and the compute also into the Greenfield. This is something that is currently being discussed in the forum, and the proposal is being built. So this is aimed to be deployed and implemented for the following versions, the close ones. And the V3, in a way, it will be also to put the databases on the decentralized platform on the Greenfield, meaning that you would access the data through some kind of interface using the same, either the SQL or some kind of MapReduce variation, and you'll be able to compute and query your data using like regular CRUD operations, but everything will be sitting on the Greenfield. So this is the illustration of the final V3 here, so that you have a browser which will communicate with the Greenfield, and the whole application, the whole stack will sit on the Greenfield, including the front end, the assets, the compute, and the database. The RPCs to the other blockchains, including the BSC, and the bridges to other blockchains like Ethereum, naturally will reside separately. But from your perspective, everything that is currently would otherwise sit or reside on the cloud computing would be moving to the Greenfield. This is the aim. We are currently exploring different approaches in terms of proposals, both on the forum and the BNB chain GitHub. So please follow and participate. And if you want, you can also contribute to the building of this platform. This is very exciting times. So how do we start to build on Greenfield? So initially we need to create a wallet. So just download either MetaMask or any other extension and connect to the testnet. We'll later give the RPCs of all the networks. You would need some BNB gas. So one note is here that the faucet for the BNB here is different from the BNB Smart Chain faucet. So it's currently built like this, but it will later be put together. So currently your Greenfield BNB Testnet token is different from the BSC Testnet token. I will explain later. This is the URL for this. So essentially go there, ask for test BNB, and this is the test BNB that you'll be using. You also have a CLI to interact with Greenfield. So as we mentioned before, you can interact with Greenfield either directly or through BNB Smart Chain. So if you want to interact directly, you can use the CLI, both to upload files or to do anything like in terms of operations. And for the smart contracting or interaction with the BNB Smart Chain, you would have to have either Greenfield contracts repository, which is a repository to build to interact with the BNB Smart Chain, or what is called Greenfield Smart Contracts SDK, which is a high-level wrapper around the previous library. It's a little bit simpler to use it. It has sort of like more object-oriented classes and interactions, so it's very simple in terms of if you're walking around domains rather than actual interactions on the protocol level. Naturally, once you build it, you'll be able to make transaction and then deploy your new smart contracts to the testnet. And in terms of ID, any ID that you prefer for the Solidity development works. You can do Remix, you can do Visual Studio Code, or any other preferable ID, as long as it supports the Solidity compiler. So when we talked about the payment model, as you remember, there were several payment accounts that you can do or you can create. So essentially what you could do, you can create payment accounts, you can query the payment account balances or the records. If the transfer was successful, you can query the result of this particular transfer. You can deposit, and you'll be depositing from your account to the payment account again. So it means that from your perspective, this is like sort of like a prepaid account. You can put all your money on the stream account that is not being touched, and transfer as you feel comfortable to the payment accounts. Be mindful that initially, if you don't create payment account, the default one is the same one. So it's better to separate it directly and to create a payment account, and to both for security perspective and for the organizational purposes. You can withdraw back naturally, and you can lock the payment account if you which would enable any further withdrawals from the account. And similarly, you would have your account model for the streaming accounts. For that one, it is a little bit simpler in a way, so you can only query it or send money to it, and that would be it. And from that one, you'll be distributing more into the payment account. So your main goal is to work with payment accounts. This is why it supports much more operations. And stream accounts are more like bank. This is also like, by the way, the query of the operation bank. And so this is how you should think about it. This is not something that you would work on the day-to-day. You're working with the payment accounts. And so that one on the billing. But when we talk about resources, so we mentioned before that you have buckets. So you have an objects. Objects can be in the buckets, and you have groups where you would put members of different groups in between the groups. And we also have token operations, so moving money back and forth between the BNB Smart Chain and the Greenfield. Remember, these are two different blockchains. It's connected through the relayer, similar to how BNB Smart Chain and Beacon Chain connected between each other. From the security perspective, the relayers or the validators of BNB Smart Chain are not the same as on the Greenfield. So this means that they cannot collude, and naturally, overall, we have a Tendermint SDK and PBFT consensus there to make sure that this does not happen. And when we talk about so what you can actually do, so here we are talking about operations from the BNB Smart Chain through the layers. So you can create and delete buckets. You can delete objects. You cannot now create object, but this is something that is being in the processing. So will be done in eminent versions. So keep track on that. And naturally, you can change permissions back and forth and operations around the groups. So if we look about how to use the contract SDK. So I put here a link to the full example. It's quite elaborate in terms of different types of objects and how to put everything together. But as you see here, there is so for instance, if we build Solidity function, this object is derived from the one of the smart contract SDK, and then you have this private protected method underscore create bucket. And this is from your perspective how you create the bucket, and you don't need to actually worry about how this is translated to the message of the relayer and how that goes to the Greenfield and how everything is going. So from your perspective, you create a payable function, someone pays for this as a transaction you mentioned. There are transactions fees, and everything is just works from your perspective. You put in your business logic inside, and then you just call the smart contract SDK to actually create some kind of functions. So here, for instance, we are looking to create a series of books. So we would create a bucket, and you need to think about it just like in regular Web2 application, reducing your business model to the set of primitives supported by the platform. When we talk about creating an object or minting, then naturally the same. You would, if you want to publish a book, then you would have the same creating an object from ERC 1155. And this is a useful object for creating NFTs, which support both fungible and non-fungible. So this is useful for any kind of use cases. And there you would just call mint, and that's it. This is minted. And for the update, so for instance, someone buys the book, and what does buying the book means? Essentially, you would have access to this book, right? So when someone pays a sufficient amount, predetermined, whatever you think the price should be, then essentially this price is paid, and then what you would do is to update the grouping and add the user who paid for the book to the specific group, and then he has access to this book. In this perspective, in this application, at least, if you think that you would need to create specifically for them, then this is something else. But this is how this is in this example. Here's how it's done. A useful tool already exists. It's called Greenfield Scan. So when you'll be developing, then you would naturally need to see if your transactions went through, if object was really created. This is something very useful for debugging. This exists already in the testnet, so you can, while creating and operating and interacting with the testnet, you can already see what is being created, what not. Reminder, this is still testnet. Sometimes it's down, so make sure that it is up and running, and look, like especially through the initial phase of development, make sure that you check on the Explorer how it is minted, if it is correctly put, to which storage provider, all these kind of things. And there is also a DSever. This is a decentralized app, so this is already Node.io partner created. So this is sort of like a Google Drive, Dropbox kind of stuff. But from your perspective, you can also try out, for instance, put a file there, and then naturally the transaction will be created, which you could see in the Greenfield scan. So you can compare the ones that been created by the server and the ones that been created by you, or you can compare the differences if you have some kind of bug. So this kind of stuff. When we talk about RPCs, so where do you need to actually connect? So as I mentioned, how is it different? So we have BNB Smart Chain, and this is chain ID 5600, and this is different from the BSC testnet, which is 97. So the regular one, up until several months ago, you had BNB Smart Chain testnet 97, BNB Smart Chain mainnet 56. Because of this is still, Greenfield is still in the sort of like in the test phase. So another testnet was created for the BNB Smart Chain. So this is not 97, this is 5600. This is very important because if you use Facet or interact with the original testnet, then essentially on this testnet of the Greenfield that is associated with Greenfield, you see there is a GNFD prefix. The addresses and the balances won't be affected. In order to avoid this frustration, remember that you need to connect both your wallet and both your application to this new testnet. The Greenfield blockchain, again, it's another blockchain, right? Inside the Greenfield, there's also a blockchain. So this is the testnet Greenfield 5600. And you also have Tendermint and ETH APIs. Depends on the application, whether you need to interact with the Tendermint or with the ETH API. And when we are talking about actually accessing the files, then there are 8 storage providers on the testnet. It's not really, doesn't really matter which one you pick. Pick the one that works for you, or the closest the pin, or just works. When you pick one as a primary provider, this is the one that you interact. So you don't really need to interact with any other. The one that it works, put it into config, and that's it. Unless you're working on the storage provider extension, some kind of, then you would naturally need to see where the replications are actually going and this kind of stuff. And this we discussed, and this is the original BSC replications, RPCs. So the deadline for the Zero2Hero is May 14th. So you still have 10 days to apply. So please look at the code, look at the examples. It's not that difficult. The documentation is very well written, and you can very quickly set it up. As I mentioned initially, you can only change the metadata and the ownerships of the file. So this sort of like reduces the complexity. So if you still need to process the data that would still be sort of like off-chain and be done in the traditional Web2 lambdas or servers. So if you have application that already exist either on the Web2 or in the design, then from your perspective, you if you want to move to the Greenfield platform, you don't at this point you don't need to change the compute part of it, only the storage and the changing of the metadata of the permissions. So this is the part that is currently being supported by the Greenfield functionality, and naturally from the scope this reduces a lot the problem to something that is very well can be fit within the hackathon for the purposes of Zero2Zero, or the other way around. We also have a social network presence in different platforms on different languages. So on Discord specifically, we have a lot of languages categories. So if you challenged to talk with your peers in English, you can also find your group in your language. So this we have a lot of users there to communicate in, and naturally on the overall hackathon or the business cases or the troubleshooting, feel free to shoot a question in the Discord or in the forum. As I mentioned, on the forum we have several currently proposals around the second further phases of the Greenfield. So feel free to read what is the vision around it, especially about the distributed compute. This will be the next phase of the product, and this is something that is will be very useful and extend the functionality of the Greenfield even more. That's it for today. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. And if not, you can also always put the questions in the Discord or in the forum.
I think we've got some questions before. Maybe we can.
It doesn't. We have a question. It is interesting to for the Greenfield, but is it recommended for DeFi or finance? It doesn't matter, because Greenfield is a storage network. It's a decentralized storage. DeFi is a decentralized finance. This is something that you would have a financial product in the token space, while financial, I guess that would be something like more traditional financial product. Both can use Greenfield as their storage layer. So even if you're developing traditional application, for instance, if you're talking about finance, I don't know, banking application, but let's take something smaller, some kind of insurance app, then you could still upload the files that, for instance, your users are sending to you in terms of their IDs or insurance claims or any of these documents. These all can be still deployed and put to the Greenfield to make sure that they are stored in the decentralized way and always available to you, and you not rely on any centralized storage. So for this particular, this is the interesting part about sort of like the Greenfield, that it is not restricted to any domain. It can be anything. You can store NFT images or books or audio files. You can store the DeFi related applications. So for instance, if you have some kind of daily rebalancing or monthly rebalancing documents that you want to do in your token baskets, for instance, but you can also use it for the traditional applications and to store there anything that you would store in traditional cloud storage.
Yeah, thank you, Victor. I think this is a kind of question, because other questions like This one, I think we've already actually answered in the whole workshop, right? So
I think we sort of like this is implicitly answered. Yeah. So this is the data storage exactly. Greenfield is exactly the data storage, and you would use storage providers to specifically store data.
yeah. And
yes. In order to upload pictures in applications, in the mobile applications, you would need to use. I'm not sure you would have to use JavaScript SDK, because mobile application implies either, unless it is React, more I guess, but you would have to use SDK. It doesn't matter in which language. If the language is not supported yet, then you can quickly create a wrapper on your own language. We already have SDKs in the JavaScript, TypeScript, Go, and regular HTTP, so you can wrap the HTTP one in Swift or Kotlin, if you're using the mobile development, or I guess JavaScript if you're using React Mobile. So yeah, so for instance, this is a good example here. This DApp integration. So you already have there everything from the smart contract perspective, the payments, the everything around it. Again, you don't really set up accounts through the smart contract, and this is done separately, as we shown before. I guess on the payment model. So here you would create accounts, and in the smart contracts, you would actually, someone would call the smart contracts, and it is payable. So someone would actually pay to this smart contract, and then the money would be transferred to the account, and you would do the application business layer, business logic. So this is how it's done.
Victor, can you copy paste the link in the chat box as well?
I don't think I can't. I can.
Okay.
Just pause the video. It's YouTube, and or you can like go to the Greenfield BNB org, because it's not selectable here.
Any other questions?
In any way, you have. Please read the Greenfield BNB chain org documentation. It's pretty thorough. Again, like if you want like quick and dirty, just like skip everything, just like go to this page and you can start building. There is also on these ones on the GitHub, on the SDKs themselves. So try to use the wrapper, as it is already simplifies a lot of things and put a lot of things into the contracts. And sort of like it's much easier to use in the domain-driven approach. If you have some kind of low-level application or some kind of infrastructure, then you will probably have to use the Greenfield contracts, as this is much low level there. Yes. So is there any way you can use Greenfield like AWS? Yes. So you can use Greenfield exactly like AWS without smart contracting, I guess, at all. As you can interact with it directly. and you can download the files directly from the storage providers. So in this way, you wouldn't be doing like the interaction through the BNB Smart Chain. You would only use it as a storage, as if you want, like as you mentioned, AWS S3. So you would have to have just the CLI, just download the CLI. CLI is very similar to the AWS CLI. So from that perspective, that would be what you want.
Okay, thanks, Victor. If there's no other questions, we will end today's workshop. And if you still have questions, do remember to join the Hackathon Discord I share here, and find the BNB Zero2Hero Hackathon channel, and you will find there like ask all the questions. We will have technical support. You can form your team and ask all the questions there. And do remember the submission deadline for the hackathon is May 14th. So remember to submit your project before the date. So thank you, Victor, and thank you for your listening. We will end all the workshop sessions here, and we still have got less than 10 days to build on project. And I wish you could build all amazing projects on BNB chain. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you for coming, and we'll be happy to look your projects and how you extend the framework or to build new use cases. Have a great day.